think that's everybody.
Cool. All right.
I'm one more person. One of my guys, Jesse. Thank you for showing up.
All right, so everybody, welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Milwaukee Sencha user group. My name is Art K. I actually work for Sencha. I'm based out of this little tiny town called Antioch, Illinois. If you don't know where Antioch is, you take 94 south, you cross the border. It's the first town past the Wisconsin-Illinois border. So I guess I usually say I'm from Chicago, but in your case, I may as well be from Milwaukee because I'm not really close to either.
You have relatives buried in Antioch.
Oh, okay, okay, yes.
I lived in Antioch.
Oh, you did? Oh, small world like that. So I don't know if either of those are good or bad at this point. I've only been there 2 years, but in either case, thank you guys for showing up today. I've got a bunch of stuff I'm going to give away at the end, but in order to be eligible for that, you needed to have RSVP'd yes to tonight's meeting on the meetup site. Most of you probably did, but if you didn't, do so before the end of the meeting. I also want to give a shout out to Omar, one of the owners of Ohms Tech. Is that accurate? You want to say a few words, Omar?
Yeah, so obviously my name is Omar, president and founder of Ohms Tech. We basically do web applications. So obviously we use Sencha a lot, one of our primary tools to get these jobs done. And we specialize really in overseas emerging markets. Sencha has really proven to be a pretty cost-effective solution within those markets. But yeah, I'm really glad that everybody could attend, and hopefully we'll continue to move these meetups forward and see more new faces next time. So, yeah.
Okay. So I've got a bunch of stuff to show you. I'm going to jump back and forth between some slides and not slides. Hopefully screen share goes okay here. Okay. Is there any glare on the TV? Do we need to turn lights off or anything? Everybody can see okay? Okay. So what we're here to talk about today is Sencha for about like 5 minutes. I'm going to just give you a brief overview for those of you who may not be intimately familiar. But really we're here to talk about the new and exciting release of Ext JS 5. So we're going to dive into some of the new features available in said product. I am Art, as I mentioned. I work for Sencha. I'm our developer relations manager, so I do a lot of content and community events, things like this. We just hired a new CEO whose name is also Art. I am not that Art. But if you want to learn more about me, my website is akawebdesign.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at ArthurAK. And so we're here to talk about Ext JS 5, a little quick slide on where you can find it, sencha.com/products/xjs. So this is the latest release of a product that's been around for the better part of 7 years. I don't know if you guys were aware, but Ext JS was first released in 2007. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But at a high level, what we're going to do is talk about Sencha at a glance. Like I said, just give you a more clear picture about who Sencha is, where we've come from, and where we're going, and then kind of talk about some of the more specific history and goals of the Ext JS product. Then we're going to take a deep dive and do some of the new features. And finally, at the end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So given that we're a small group, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. I want to make this really casual and as interactive as possible. So don't feel like you can't stop me in my tracks if you want clarification or have just general questions. So Sencha at a glance. We're a company that's been around since early 2007, and we are venture capital backed by the 3 companies you see here on the screen, Jafco, Sequoia, and Radar. So Sencha is based in Redwood City, California, right down the street from Google and Apple and everybody else in that part of the San Francisco Bay Area. So part of the reason I want to mention where Sencha's come from is that when you look at the landscape of application frameworks on the web today, or even just general web code, when you think back to where we were as an industry in 2007, it was an immensely different landscape. Most of the technologies you were using were things like jQuery, which, believe it or not, was only first released in 2006. So we, came very shortly after jQuery came out. If you were doing interactive web applications on the web in 2007, you were probably writing them in Flash. We all know where Flash is today. It's all but dead. The iPhone was first released in 2007. Android hadn't come out yet. Windows Phone didn't exist. So it's really kind of amazing to think about Sencha as a company having survived as long as we have, and Ext.js being as popular as it is today, knowing how the landscape has really changed. And to tack onto that, when you think about other products you might use instead of Sencha, things like AngularJS or Kendo UI or some of these other products, it's not that we would say they're not good technology, because I think they're popular because they are. But when you think about Sencha being a company that's standing behind our products and that we've enabled our customers to be successful for almost a decade in a space that has not stayed the same for more than a year, I think that says something about us as a company. To take that a step further, we've got about 2 million developers worldwide, so we're not just some small pocket of the web ecosystem. We're immensely popular. We're very popular amongst companies in the enterprise, companies in the commercial space. We've got more than 10,000 commercial customers. So again, people have trusted us for a long time, and they continue to do so because we're standing there behind our products. One of my favorite sales points, and as a caveat, I'm not actually in sales, so this is probably why I enjoy saying this stat, but more than 60% of the Fortune 100 use our products. So that may or may not be something meaningful, but it's kind of a cool stat to show you that some of the largest and most powerful companies on earth use our products. Sencha as a company has evolved from more than just the Ext.js product line in 2007. Since then, we've come out with more than a handful of products that really fit into the whole development lifecycle for enterprise applications, meaning that we want to help our customers not only plan and design their applications, and we have Sencha Architect. Anyone here familiar with Sencha Architect? A couple of you, okay. For those of you who aren't, Sencha Architect is a visual design tool that allows you to drag and drop user interface widgets, basically construct a fully functioning application with writing very little JavaScript code. So that tool allows you to do that for both desktop and mobile apps, or our Ext.js and Sencha Touch frameworks. And that also ties into the rest of our product line in that we've got 2 JavaScript frameworks for building enterprise applications, Ext.js, as well as Sencha Touch. We also have a Java toolkit called the Ext.js GWT for Google Web Toolkit. Those of you who might prefer Java over JavaScript. Does anybody like writing Java in here? I'm just curious. Some of you, okay? There's nothing wrong with Java. It's got its own quirks compared to JavaScript. So I guess like live in a glass house, you can't throw stones. But and then finally, Sencha likes to help our customers take their applications and to deploy them in meaningful ways within their own ecosystem. So we have Sencha Space is a product that we've released within the last 12 months that helps companies in the enterprise really focus the way that they deploy mobile applications for their users. When you think about how an enterprise may have anywhere from 2 to 10 applications that they want their users to have, to manage the life cycles of those applications individually becomes a nightmare, especially when you've got tens of thousands of users. Sencha Space is a solution to that. I'm not going to go into too much more detail than that, but check out the website if that sounds interesting. So, happy to announce that XJS 5 was released just a few weeks ago. It really is a step forward in the framework and for the solutions that we are able to offer our customers as a result. So some of the business goals that we had leading up to XJS 5 are that we wanted to make multi-device development something really easy for our customers. So in our part of the industry, what we find most often are that our enterprise customers want to build desktop applications, things that are running, lots of, charts, data-heavy grids, all kinds of really interesting reporting features. If you want to share, I got a share up here for you. And that's fine and good, except it's 2014, and obviously mobile's been around for a long time. But when you look at the really large companies in the enterprise space, things like really large financial companies, they typically aren't as interested in mobile phones as they are tablets, because the sales guys, the VPs, the executives, they all want to take their desktop applications and run them on their tablets, to take out into the field, talk to their customers, go into meetings, rather than carrying around their bulky Windows laptops. So XJS 5 enables that cross-device development just out of the box. There's nothing new you need to do if you go to the XJS application to run your applications on tablets. We also wanted to make XJS 5 a release that was evolutionary and not revolutionary. In our history, about 2011 when we released XJS 4, we did a really bad job of helping our customers upgrade from one product version to the next. And we, at least I would like to think, and I think to your point earlier, Omar, I think we've done a really good job of this, making the upgrade process very smooth and seamless to an XJS 4 and XJS 5. So we've added lots of features, we've improved performance, we've done a lot of really interesting things with the framework without making you or your development teams have to rewrite really large applications. In fact, there's very little migration that needs to be done. We've tried to improve developer productivity in XJS 5. We've done that by further extending our robust class system. So in XJS, the class system is an object-oriented approach to building JavaScript applications. And to piggyback that just a step further, we've been supporting the MVC approach to building applications for the last 3.5, 4 years in XJS 4. We've now added support for MVVM, which is a model view model, as an architectural choice for your applications. But we don't force you to switch from MVC to MVVM. You kind of choose when and where to use some of these features. So again, this is an evolution, not a breaking change for the framework. And MVVM helps to increase your team's productivity by offloading lots of the manual code you'd write. MVVM handles a lot of the data binding and logical operations by itself. You don't have to do anything else. So we'll dive into that in just a little bit. And then last but not least, backwards and forwards compatibility. So as we look to the future, we want to continue to make XJS a series of evolution, and not so much forcing our customers to change the way that they build applications. So I mentioned a little while ago, where XJS first started in 2007 and what the landscape of software development looked like on the web at that point. And so in 2007, we had 2 releases of XJS, XJS 1 as well as XJS 2. In 2009, we released XJS 3, which was one of the first JavaScript libraries to include charting. Now, at that time, we had to use Flash charting because the browsers, in 2009, we think you got, I think IE 8 maybe had just been released right around then, and if you weren't using Flash, you could not do any robust visualization. There really wasn't anything you could do. Canvas, I don't think existed. SVG and VML were barely supported if they were supported at all. So Flash was the only thing you could do. Come 2011, when we released XJS 4, we got rid of Flash charts in favor of SVG and VML, again, because of just where the industry was heading, and offered support for MVC architecture. And then come 2014, we're now at XJS 5 with all of these great new features. So, what I'm hoping to sort of visualize for you here is that XJS is tried and true. Our customers have stuck with us because they believe, as we do, that we're the best JavaScript framework for building enterprise web apps. So enough rambling about what Sencha is, where we've come from. Let's talk about what's new, more specifically. So I mentioned tablet support on some brief level a moment ago. XJS 5 supports tablets out of the box. Once you upgrade, you don't have to do anything to enable your applications to run and run quickly on tablets. So that is thanks to several things. The first being that we have changed the way in which events are handled on the framework, so that we now handle the translation between mouse events and tap events, swipes, pinch, the whole gamut of touch events you're used to using on mobile devices. They're now supported in XJS 5, and we try to map those to the relevant mouse events so that when you're building applications, you don't have to do anything extra to make those interactions just work. To piggyback on that, we've also added 2 new themes to XJS 5. Again, these are primarily there to help support tablets, because when you think about using tablets, most of us have fingers that are slightly fatter than a mouse cursor. So being able to have a larger surface area on which to interact with applications helps with tablet support. Beyond themes and tablets, we've incorporated two-way data binding and MVVM. So, by the way, stop me if you need me to further explain MVC, MVVM, or a variety of other acronyms that I may toss into my presentation. I'm trying to assume a certain level of knowledge here, but if you need me to slow down, back up, and clarify, just shout those questions out. But two-way data binding and MVVM are just 2 ways of adding functionality to applications without increasing their complexity. So you think very often about how we build applications. We've got some view that sits in the application, maybe a form with a variety of fields, and that form may map to a data record that we've pulled off of the server somewhere. And rather than having to manually synchronize all of the form fields to the data fields when you hit save, or if a record updates somewhere else in the application, two-way data binding and MVVM allowed this to happen seamlessly. So like I said, it just decreases the amount of complexity that you need to physically write inside your code. XJS 5 has a variety of added and improved widgets to our massive widget library. And then we also added routing so that you can make completely stateful applications using any custom routes that you want in your application. So we're going to dive into that in just a little while.
So is there any way to test this? I'm totally new to Sencha,
Sure.
by the way. Is there any way to test this stuff without having, 130 different devices around to physically test?
Yes. So one of the things I'll get to show you in just a minute is oh, I got you. Got to kill this. I'm going to show you the XJS kitchen sink in a little bit, where you could either navigate to your desktop, and we've got like, I don't know, 50 or 70 examples in here. So you can play with them on your desktop. It has all the code over here on the right-hand side. But then you could also visit this on your tablet. So you don't actually have to wrap it, say, in a native app. You can just go to your you can visit our kitchen sink using your tablet's browser, which, for all intents and purposes, is the same environment as it would be if you were wrapping a web application into a natively packaged app. There are some finer points around that, but I'm going to try not to muddy the water quite yet for you. But yeah, so if you visit docs.sencha.com, and you click on XJS5 over here on the right-hand or the left-hand side, we have an XJS5 examples, and then right there's the kitchen sink.
Right. Yeah, I did check that out.
Okay.
So,
Yes,
I
if
had
you.
a Windows phone, so it was a little bit sluggish.
Okay. Yeah, it would be far better if you had a tablet of any kind, I think.
Right.
It's not really optimized so much for phones, but that's mainly a result of the widget set than anything else.
More focused on enterprise. So.
Exactly. So for those of you who've been with XJS for a while, one of the things that you would note would be that we are as cross-browser compliant as possible. And in XJS4, you could have used any browser as early as IE6 through the latest versions of Firefox, Opera, Chrome, basically any browser on the desktop you could use. And that's still true in XJS5 with the exception of IE6 and IE7. We did finally kill them because our customers finally killed them. So it's somewhat horrifying to know that if you go into the world's largest banks, that they're all still running IE8. 2 years ago it would have been IE7. So we're just there to support our customers. But in addition then to anything on the desktop, we've also added support for your mobile device browser. So on iOS, you're going to have Safari 6 and above. On Android 4.1 and above, you're going to have Chrome, which is the default browser that ships with those versions of Android. And on your Surface tablets or your Windows 8 devices that are touch-enabled, they default to IE10. So we support those browsers as well. What's very interesting to note about that is if you were to take an XJS application and natively wrap it using a tool like Cordova. Is anyone here familiar with Cordova or PhoneGap? Some of you? Okay. What you end up getting on your most recent versions of iOS, and Omar, you were just at WWDC, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but with the next version of iOS, you actually get a really good web view that amounts to Safari.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of performance improvements and just general improvements with the new Safari.
So on Android devices, again, the newest Android devices, when you natively wrap, you get, for all intents and purposes, Chrome. And same thing on Windows mobile devices. You, for all intents and purposes, get IE10. It's the same JavaScript engines, the same rendering engines. You just don't have like your address bar and your back buttons. So XJS is perfectly positioned to deliver those enterprise apps across any browser on any device, so long as it is quote-unquote modern. Right? Along those lines, then, I did mention tablet support. So what is very exciting then is as you're developing applications on the desktop, you start to get all kinds of interesting mouse interactions. So not only do you have clicks and right clicks and click and drag, we've started to map some of those to the relevant gestures on touch devices. Now, you can't do that in every case. Things like mouse over. There is no like touch over event on a tablet. So I'd be lying if I said it's completely seamless for any app to make the transition to mobile devices. But for the most part, all of your standard mouse events are going to map directly to a touch event, so that you don't have to do anything out of the box. In those other cases, mouse overs, right clicks, conceivably other things that I can't think of off the top of my head, you might have to add an additional event handler to whatever the appropriate thing was on a mobile device. But we make that really easy for you now, where we support all of those mobile events. These are our two new themes. We call them Crisp and Neptune Touch. And again, if you've been with XJS since 2007 or even really 2011, our default theme was this sort of periwinkle blue with really small margins, small text sizes, things that were very popular, thanks to apps like Microsoft Excel. Everyone at that time was doing very data-heavy apps, and so you wanted to conserve every possible square millimeter of screen real estate. Well, thanks to the explosion of mobile, the UX design patterns have tremendously changed since then. So on top of people wanting to have more space, flatter colors, and a variety of other things, you also need wider margins and wider surface area to just simply interact with applications on mobile. So these two new themes help to support that. In XJS 4, we did switch our themes to use SAS, which if you're not familiar, stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets, sort of an abstraction layer on top of CSS, so that you can use things like variables, functions, mix-ins, have inheritance through style sheets, and that all compiles down to CSS for you to use on the web. So both Crisp and Neptune Touch, much like the other 8 themes that ship with XJS 5, they all utilize our SAS inheritance model. So if you need to extend or build your own theme, really, really easy to do so. You don't have to physically slice up images in Photoshop. You can very quickly, very easily change margins, colors, fonts, and you can do so all the way down to the specific widget level. In terms of architecture, I mentioned XJS 4 was the first to introduce the Model View Controller pattern for MVC. And this is essentially what MVC does. The user interacts with the application in some way. Usually that's by clicking a button or mousing over something, selecting a record on the grid. And those widgets are what we call views. Those views then fire events based on the interaction. The controller monitors those events and does stuff. Maybe it has to update the model, which correlates to your data. Maybe it does something else to the view, but round and around the circle we go. And XJS 5 still supports MVC. In fact, the MVC pattern was tremendously useful for applications running in the enterprise, where you have literally hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Model View Controller helps you separate your code into logical pieces so that they're easier to maintain, they're just easier to build. So in XJS 5, we've also added support for Model View View Model, which is a very similar yet distinctly different approach to architecture that can play simultaneously with Model View Controller. So it's a bit of a mindfuck in this abstracted way, but in a nutshell, when you look at model view controller, you're interacting with the view. You're still interacting with the view in this case, and I should have had a little user interacting with view over here. But much in the same way that the view fired off events to a controller in MVC, it still does that in MVVM. And then the view controller might then update the view with something else. The advantage of the view model, however, in MVVM is that you can have data directly bound to a view. So in the example of a form field and a record that's come out of the database, as you're beginning to change the records in the form, or sorry, the fields on the form, the data binding can automatically update that record, so that if that record's used anywhere else in the application, it's all simultaneously updated without you having to do any additional logic. So you don't have to physically tell the application, go and find wherever else this record's being used and update that piece of data. It'll happen automatically through data binding. So that's a really phenomenal part of the architecture. Oh, and if I didn't do nearly a good enough job explaining that, we have 2 really good posts on the Sencha blog that dive deeply into that concept. So please take a look at those if that's something of interest. This is really a diagram explaining data binding, and that the model and the view just simultaneously update each other. So in the inverse of my example, if you've got a form bound to a piece of data and that data is updated somewhere else, it'll automatically update the form. So it goes both directions. A really awesome feature we added to XJS 5 is the ability to have responsive layouts. So raise your hand if you've heard of responsive design. Yeah, pretty much everybody. It's probably the most overused term in our industry over the last 24 months. But everybody wants to use it, especially on mobile. And so we've enabled responsive layouts using a responsive config, so appropriately named, where you can configure applications to change their layout in one of 2 ways. You can say, as an application is put into either landscape or portrait mode, depending on the way in which you shake your tablet, you can change where a particular widget is rendered. Or you could say, if my device is less than or greater than a certain number of pixels, then you change the way the application looks. And just to show you an example of this, this is our executive dashboard, one of the new examples that has shipped with XJS 5. Again, so you go to docs.sencha.com and you can actually play with this example. So you notice here that I've got a series of tabs on the left-hand side. As I'm clicking around here, the application changes as any other application would. But if I simply move this down, we can see all of a sudden the application has changed itself. You can see how fast this has happened. This is actually really impressive to think that that's all done through JavaScript, not through CSS media queries. Now our menu shows up here. So switching the views still happens as fast as it did before. So that's a really cool feature that I guess really more pertains to applications that are going between desktop and tablets, but conceivably could also affect applications that might run on giant TV screens versus desktop computers as well. So that's another new feature for you guys to play with. Okay. If any of you got into XJS because of the same reason I did, it's because of our grid. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say the XJS grid is easily the best grid of any JavaScript framework that exists. And I say that in terms of performance, features, and extensibility. And that if you want to render literally hundreds of thousands of items to a grid, the XJS grid is the only grid that's going to be able to handle that data set. If you want to add lots of widgets to a grid, good luck doing this in AngularJS or something else. And that's not bad-mouthing another piece of technology. It's really just emphasizing how good our grid is. And so, yet another example I can showcase for you is, so this is again in the XJS kitchen sink. This is called our widget grid. So we've done two things to the grid in XJS 5 that are worth noting. The first is that we've improved rendering performance by changing the way in which each of the rows physically gets rendered to your browser. In prior versions, we've used just a series of HTML divs, to the point where it's divs all the way down the turtle hole. People, that's a fair argument to make against the XJS framework, is that it's just lots of divs all over the browser. But that gives us acceptable performance. So I'm not really going to sit here and try to defend that. But in the case of the grid, and in cases where you're rendering lots and lots of data, we actually swap out divs for the rows in place of HTML tables, because that allows the browser to handle all of the sizing via CSS rather than us doing that manually in JavaScript. So the performance is improved over the already good performance we had in XJS 4. Additionally, we've added these things called grid widgets, where you can now render widgets directly to grid cells and have them automatically reflect the data that they're displaying. So in the case of this grid here, you can see we've got a progress bar, a slider, all kinds of cool charts and things like that, buttons. And as I start interacting with my slider, you'll notice it's automatically updating my progress bar and the button over here. And, it's seamless, it's incredibly fast. So this is something we're really excited about. And I was trying to find an example that showed how the charts can automatically update as well via a live data feed. I wasn't able to find that before I came in here, but you can do lots of really cool things with the grid widgets. So we're very, very excited about that. Session management is something that kind of came about because of the way we've noticed our enterprise customers using data. In XJS 4, did anybody use model associations in XJS 4? A few people, okay. Model associations weren't really well baked in XJS 4. That was a shortcoming of that product version, which we fixed in XJS 5. What I mean by that is, in some cases, if you had a record that was associated to other data and you needed to update the associated data, we didn't have a good way of synchronizing that entire workflow back up to the server. Session management has fixed that, where now every time a record's brought into an XJS application, we have a client-side session managing every one of those data records, which now helps to synchronize all of the data that gets sent to and from the server, so that there aren't any runtime errors that pop up when you have these really complicated data relationships. So I don't have a good example to show you here. It's more of a conceptual topic than anything else, but trust me when I say session management is a really, really good feature. It's also something I don't think any other client framework has. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. Routing is something I mentioned earlier, and somebody had a question on that earlier. But routing has to do with deep linking into an application to help manage application state. So when you look at the URL we've got up here, see, example.com/whatever, then pound, and then maybe some words or numbers separated by various kinds of slashes or pipes or hyphens. You can define what the routes look like in your own application, but the point being that XJS 5 fully supports deep linking and multiple routes per application. The XJS kitchen sink is itself actually an example of how to use routing. So when you go to the kitchen sink, I don't know if you can actually see this well, but you see Sencha.com/ext5 examples kitchen sink. We've got this pound widget grid that ties itself to the actual example. And if I were to click on a different example, all of a sudden our route has changed. So the page hasn't physically reloaded, but if you were to refresh the page, it'll now take you back to this new example and not the prior example. So this is just the way in which deep linking for an application works.
Now this is something that Sencha Touch has had for a while.
Correct.
It's part of Sencha Core, I guess, that
what is
implementation is the same between Sencha Touch and EXT in terms of at least what we would do in terms of writing code.
Basically, yes. So
I mean, for us, that's a pretty huge thing to kind of continue to standardize Sencha Touch and
Yeah. So to your point there, Sencha Touch and XJS are slowly moving towards convergence. And I use a convergence maybe with some air quotes, in that I do not have the authority to actually say that the products will eventually converge, but our feature sets are converging to the point where you can share code between applications. So you can build a Sencha Touch app that reuses code from an XJS application, whether or not the code bases for those two products physically converge at some point. But I digress.
No, it's definitely nice to see some of these features being standardized between the two, especially since we do mobile applications probably just as much as we do desktop, and just being able to understand and know how things are going to function, feel confident that they're going to function the same way is a pretty huge thing. So.
So charts. Charts have changed again in XJS, but changed more so under the hood than anything else, in that XJS 4, as I mentioned earlier, was a step away from XJS 3, which utilized flash charting. XJS 4 brought in SVG and VML, depending on which browser you were in. And XJS 5 has taken charting to a new page, in that we do physically share the charting library now with Sencha Touch. So in Sencha Touch, what we realized was that even though SVG and VML are highly performant on devices that support them, SVG is mainly performant because of things like battery power and memory. It's much more powerful than, say, Canvas, but Canvas takes less resources. And so on mobile devices like your phone, we noticed that charting in Canvas was tremendously faster than charting in SVG, whereas the opposite is true on desktop. So what we've done in XJS 5 is to include the Sencha Touch charts, so that as you're building charts across devices, you can now utilize all the performance improvements dependent upon the best charting approach for that device. So if you're on, say, your iPad or your Surface tablet, you're very likely to get Canvas charting, as opposed to when you're on your desktop computer, in which you're probably going to get SVG. So in addition to that, since we've swapped to the Sencha Touch charting library, you now get to utilize even more kinds of charts, where we have things like candlestick charts for financial reporting, scatter charts, bubbles, a variety of other things. All of our charts are still fully customizable. They're also touch-enabled, so you can interact with the charts on your mobile device. So things like, as a side note, we do have a charting kitchen sink as well. It's separate from our regular kitchen sink. So here's an example of one of our radial charts, and I can actually drag it around and interact with it. So you can imagine doing this on your iPad. And we've got 20 or 30 examples here as well of things like bar charts, spline charts, area charts. Here are some candlesticks. We got how half these things work. Pie charts. And so fully interactive, fully customizable, and highly performant.
So you can still use the underlying drawing classes to
Yes.
make your own thing that's not even a chart.
Correct. Yeah. So we have the XJS charts are built on what we call the draw package, which is essentially a bare bones visualization package for you to do a variety of all things draw. But the only thing we really ship with that utilizes that is our charting package. And then, as Omar pointed out before, XJS and Sencha Touch now do actually share some code between the two frameworks. So when you think about XJS, you think about Sencha Touch, they're both JavaScript application frameworks. Sencha Touch is a framework geared specifically at mobile devices. So if you're building applications for phone or tablet, you would probably use Sencha Touch. If you're developing something for desktop or arguably tablet, you would use XJS. And the core code between the two frameworks is now physically shared. So this does mean you can create code for one framework and use it in an application in the other framework. In that sense, then, the major difference between XJS and Sencha Touch is really the widget sets that ship with both of those frameworks. So Sencha Touch is really meant to give you applications on mobile that feel like mobile applications. If you want to build an iOS app that looks like an iOS app, sounds like an iOS app, you would use Sencha Touch because that's what it's designed for. If you want to build a enterprise desktop application that can be used on a tablet, you would probably use XJS. There are some variations in between. You could write applications in both that share code. The overarching point here, though, is that XJS is moving us toward that convergence of shared code. So, and okay, these slides are going to be terrible to see here, but resources. I mentioned the kitchen sink demos that we have, which you can just find at docs.sencha.com. And as part of that, we have a variety of user guides, one of which is called What's New in XJS 5. And you can just page through that. It's a fairly extensive document, covering much of what I talked about here today, but in far greater detail. We have a blog post on our blog called Announcing XJS 5 that was, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago, so it's probably still on the first page of our blog. And then finally, we have a blog post called Delegated Events and Gestures. So if you're interested in finding out how you can build applications on desktop that port really well onto tablets, that post talks about how the events and gestures get delegated between the two platforms, and all of that happens seamlessly for you. So at this point, open forum.
So one thing I want to add in regards to your last point with documentation, handy feature that a lot of people are not aware of is that the standard docs, you'll see a lot of code snippets, and a lot of people don't know that those are actually live code snippets. You can, there's something up here. You can actually edit those code snippets and switch them over to, actually run right there in the documentation, which is very helpful. You're trying to understand exactly what a property does or something like that.
So here's a grid panel. You can see our code example, but I can hit live preview, and it'll actually render a grid for me. But I can edit that as well. I can, perhaps rather than calling the title of mine Simpsons, which again, if we're looking here, the title appears right here, Simpsons. I can say Milwaukee. It's actually spelled correctly. And then I can see it's actually been updated in the live preview. So that is a really useful feature, especially as you're trying to explore what each of the 159 configuration options for our grid actually do, or if you want to play with the 218 methods or 114 events. So.
I guess taking that one step further too, a lot of people are not aware of the Sencha Fiddle site, which is pretty convenient.
Fiddle.sencha.com. Kind of the same idea where you have a live environment where you can add even multiple files, so you can really scale up an entire MVC or MVVM application, and then run that, and it'll run over here on the right-hand side. So it's also very useful. Questions, though? Seriously, speak up.
So you talked about upgrading from 4 to 5.
Yes.
Being nice and seamless.
Yes.
So my code base is 3.4 still.
Ooh, sorry.
I'm guessing there's no easy way to take that.
Sadly, no. The and again, my apologies for our predecessors not doing a good job with the 3 to 4 version upgrade. Part of the problem that you're going to run into right off the bat is on top of the several thousand API changes that you're going to run into, just the architecture in general. XJS 3.x didn't have a defined architectural pattern, and so migrating that by itself to an architectural pattern supported by XJS 4/5 is going to be a considerable amount of efforts, even if you had done it, relatively close to what might have been. And then beyond that, to integrate something like Sencha Command, you wouldn't have to use Sencha Command, but in order for you to get a minified production build of your code base, you would want to spend the extra time to do that, and that's just going to be one extra step. And then you're going to get to your several thousand API changes. So you're more than likely looking at a rewrite to jump to 5. But having said that, might entirely be worth your while just in terms of browser support, performance, and everything else. So not knowing anything about your company, and obviously you drinking the Sencha Kool-Aid, now is definitely a good time to consider what you can to switch directions for that app. If you're running XJS 3.4, your app is probably the better part of 5 or 6 years old. Ish.
It would have been almost 5 years old.
Okay, so I mean, the odds that any application, not necessarily yours, you may write the best code in the world, but code that I wrote 5 years ago is horrible. So from just the legacy code perspective, like I said, it's well worth the effort to consider that, but there is no easy path for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen an upgrade go smoothly in my life. It's like no matter what it is, whether it's an operating system or just a program or anything else, it's like there's always that one little thing that just goes wrong. So you're always better off just getting rid of it and just installing a new version cleanly.
Yeah.
So my predecessors just jump ship to a new project.
Hmm?
My predecessors jump ship and into a different project.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
So what you're saying is that it's well documented too.
Yeah.
Yeah, does Sencha have anything built in for making documentation easier?
Yes and no. So we don't have a specific Sencha quote-unquote product that we sell.
Okay.
But if you're familiar with Markdown,
Right.
so we have a tool that we've open sourced we have an open source channel that we call Sencha Labs, and there's a product called Sencha or JS Duck for documentation. That is a tool that, in short, runs on top of Ruby, that parses your inline documentation and builds output that looks exactly like our API doc. So we use JS Duck for our own documentation to kind of show you how that works. You get your /*, and then anything inside of there can be Markdown, and then all of that then gets translated into the API docs that you see. So like configuration properties over here are marked with @config, type of Boolean, and then some explanation of that. JS Duck then just spins up API docs that look exactly like what we have, again, because we drink our own champagne.
Okay.
We drink our own Kool-Aid, maybe. And what's really neat then is that not only does it give you the fully functioning separation of configuration properties, so I can click on any one of these, takes me right to them. It is also searchable. So it's just you don't have to do anything but download the Ruby gem, run a simple command which you can write a shell script for, and then within about 30 seconds you've got documentation. So the hardest part is actually writing the documentation. So like I said, that's on Sencha Labs. It's fully open sourced. We've got a couple of videos on here about it.
That sounds kind of similar to how it's done with Java.
Java Doc is basically where this came from. We had a predecessor to JS Duck we called Ext Doc, which was based off of whatever that Java Doc. So it's been an evolution from that sense, but yeah, it's been tremendously useful to us, and it's super easy.
Yeah, the technical stuff is easy, but all this other stuff that needs to go around this,
Yeah, right.
it's just a pain.
Yes, no. My job role prior to being in our marketing team was in professional services. So I spent 3 years on Sencha's professional services team, going out, doing consulting for all of our large clients. So when I say, it's frightening to see what the largest banks in the world use to run their software, I am frightened that I give them my money. We're talking, they run databases, running apps with Perl. Yeah, they're 15 years in production, and nobody knows how they work, so they don't touch them. It's horrifying.
The people who wrote it have been gone for 12
yeah.
years.
Except for the guys who maintain the mainframes, who are 75 years old, because they've got the best job security in the world. There's nobody touching that mainframe.
Can you talk a little bit about customizing themes?
Yes.
Using Sencha?
Sure. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to spout off an example off the top of my head here, but let's do this. Let's go back to my handy-dandy API documentation. This is where I live like 90% of my day. One of the things we have here, you'll see CSS vars and CSS mixins. So for any given component, and in this case we're on the Ext grid panel, we'll see all of these, $ and then variable names. These all correlate to the Sass variables that are in our Sass theme. So like, if I actually click on that, it'll tell me This is a Boolean thing that tells us whether or not the default grid gets a frame in this case, or perhaps better example might be the base color for a grid panel. And live coding never goes well, but I will attempt to actually do this. What you end up doing is editing some of your CSS values, or sorry, your Sass values, and then you recompile your Sass theme using Sencha command. You could using Sass command line suite of tools that Sencha offers to do a variety of things, namely theme generation, application minification, deployment of various things. Sorry for spitting. And more than a handful of other things that are far more technical than I choose to get into right this minute. But okay, so you're lucky that I spent earlier today working on a sample app to prove something worked, and we're gonna live code and try to actually modify the theme for this. Let's see how this goes. So this particular app is Sencha. Okay, so what you'll see here is that I've got a grid. It's a 400 by 200 grid. It doesn't have any data in it right now. So I'll see if I can actually modify my theme on the fly here. So, and what you'll notice when you go into an XJS application generated with Sencha command is that ext Azure is the folder holding my application, and all Sencha applications generated with Sencha command have a consistent application structure. And so this is two parts. One, it makes it easy for us to use things like Sencha command. But two, it actually benefits you as the developer by having consistency in the applications you build. So jumping from application to application, I'm guessing your application probably looks nothing like this. Okay, so that's one of the benefits here is that as we standardize our ecosystem, it means you jumping onto any new project don't have to worry about what the hell does this project look like. So one of the folders underneath there is Sass, and underneath here we've got a variety of folders that correlate to different parts of our theming structure. And so trying to do this off the top of my head is going to be very interesting.
Well, while you're figuring that out,
yes.
One thing I want to mention, people might find useful, with Sencha command, you can actually generate a package which can be essentially of a type theme, and it's essentially one command that will generate a new package and extend an existing theme, and from there it would fall into the packages folder you see right there, and then you can, basically it's an easy way to extend various themes, and if you, for example, are white labeling one of your products for different clients, you can basically extend from a core theme and then generate these extended themes, do kind of your customizations for their brand colors. Using all these Sass variables that you showed in documentation makes that actually pretty straightforward. You can have essentially two or more themes that look pretty different and look very customized, but are only 10 to 15 lines of code that are actually different. So
just trying to remember how I define this, because I always confuse Sass and actual CSS. So, okay. So I'm going to attempt to do, we'll see if this works. What I've done is that under my Sass, and then I have this etc folder for etc. I created all.scss, in which I'm putting base color to black. So base color is a variable that affects the base color of the entire theme. And if I've done this correctly, that by itself, www Sencha Ext. Sure. And well, I can't. I'm drawing a blank here. Oh, it's not what I want. There's actually a different command. I could do compass. It's had one beer and I already forget what the command is here. There's a command I can run that only generates my theme, and no, it's you would think it would be, but
the help command on theme more times than I want to admit thinking that's what it does. But
just Google it real quick.
This is actually leading to a good point that I do want to mention about theming, so I'll add that when we get through this stuff.
Sure, sure. I guess I could do such a theme build. Not the one I'm thinking of, though.
I wasn't sure if it's more of a Sencha touch thing, but it was under the resources directory. Subdirectory for SAS.
For what, I'm sorry?
There's a subdirectory for SAS under the resources.
Yes, yeah, so... Our ext, all of our themes are now considered pages. In my case, I'm extending Neptune, ext theme Neptune. And then under there, it's got Sass, and you can look at what the actual Sass variables are, like under etc or var. You know, so
if you're trying to track down or customize a theme, being able to dig into what he just showed is actually very helpful. Kind of know what base variables. So much builds on each other. Obviously using Sass functions like darken or lighten on certain colors. So knowing how that all comes together if you're trying to extend on an existing theme is really helpful. So
so minus the fact I had to do an entire Sencha app build to get my theme regenerated. If I could have remembered that other command, it would have just regenerated my CSS. But you can see here it automatically swapped the color. So now coming to our API docs, if I go back to my grid panel and I say, I'm not sure what a good one to pick will be. How about panel header text padding? That seems like a good one. And so, in theory, I should be able to throw in some arbitrary value here. Oh, I know what it was. Sencha and Sass. So this will still take a minute here to run, but.
So yeah, I guess what I wanted to mention is one thing that we found makes this initial theming process a lot easier is architect.
Yes.
Basically, you can download one of kind of the preset architect projects, which will show you all the majority of all the components, component types, and then you can, all these variables that Art's been showing us here, basically you have a huge list of them in Architect and can just change them on the fly. Things automatically compile, and you can see right there the change take effect. So
Yes.
yeah, definitely Architect is kind of our go-to thing for theming nowadays. You do want to keep theming as isolated as possible from the actual application anyway. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Obviously, I don't actually know what the variable panel header text padding was supposed to do. I don't think it did anything in this case. So I'm just going to stop this live coding example before it gets any worse. But you kind of get the idea here. It's it's an abstracted layer on top of CSS, so that if you wanted to say, take your base color and obviously that cascades now through the entire framework. But if I only wanted to do that on like my grid title panels versus any other title panel, you can do that as well. So you've got that fine-tuned granular control over theming, but you can also just very quickly change a few things and make your theme different than the default Sencha theme. So, other questions? Yeah.
First one is there any plans to open up Sencha Architect so that not free for 30 days and then a bunch more?
I don't know. Despite the fact I work in marketing, I don't actually know if there are plans to change the licensing model on Sencha Architect. So I guess by default my answer is no. Next question, you had two?
Second question, is the intent of this meetup to meet monthly?
Yes, so Omar and I were talking about this previously. We would like to get to a point where we get this meetup on a monthly basis. We have a meeting next month. It will not actually be here. It'll be, where is Corvisa? I don't even know where that is.
not too far.
Just down the
Down the street, okay, yes. So real close to here. And in August, I believe you or one of your team will host a meeting probably here.
Yeah, we'll do one here in August.
So this will probably end up being the default location until we outgrow it. But we would like to get to a point where it meets every month. So on that note, if anybody here has an idea for a topic that you would like to see presented, or if you have something you would like to present, obviously I'm not the world's best presenter, so you can probably do a better job than I can. Please speak up, contact either Omar or I. We'd love to have you come in here, show off something you built, talk about a problem you don't know how to solve, and you have an open discussion. This is a very casual event that we would very much like to have once a month. This is not really an extension of the Sencha marketing machine. It's really more to develop community involvement.
I'd like to see maybe a second touch app being built, so maybe
Okay.
one collectively.
Yeah. I think that'd be a great idea. So,
Yeah, that's definitely something we can do. And just to add to this, something I did want to mention in this meetup, myself or my team, Brad, Jesse, one of us is always going to be here at the Hudson working. So if you're ever around and just have extra problems or questions, feel free to stop in and ask for somebody from Homestech. As we grow, we're continuing to put more emphasis on kind of giving back to the development community. And we would not be where we are now if there wasn't so much good code and guides and everything other developers do. So definitely don't be a stranger in that sense.
more questions? Don't be shy.
One of the issues I see is bringing someone new. It's never worked in the environment before. And I understand completely based on just the number of features that have been added, the number of capabilities that have been added. It's gotten really, really complex. You almost can't create a new project without using command or architect. I would love to see someone just start off with HTML page and a folder and create a new project. And it's a lot of times I'll start with something that I've got and I want to break it down for someone so they have something easy to understand. I think it will take me all day just to strip out the stuff I want and pull things from the loader over here, and end up with a project like, you know, 1 or 2 JavaScript files in a single page. So there's your base project. Start there. Continue your way around.
Sure.
And it's, you know, I do understand, but just the level of complexity that's there anymore.
And that's actually really good feedback. That's something we made a high priority leading up to the XJS 5 launch. And if you go to the Sencha website under Products, Sencha and Ext JS, you get to this page, and we have a section called Get Up and Running. One of the things I was tasked with leading up to the product launch was trying to do what I could to solve that specific problem. And I wasn't given a lot of time to do this, but what we've tried to do is to give you a step-by-step introduction to the framework. And to your point about having a single HTML page, you know, forget architect, forget Sencha command, you just give me HTML and let me start writing some JavaScript. The very first link we have under introduction, Hello World, takes you through exactly that, where you simply create index HTML, you shove in a link to our CSS and ext_all GPL files, and then you say, or then we say just start shoving code into either an app.js file, or you can write it directly within your script tags. So I'm hoping this is at least a good first step there. We still have a long way to go. In fact, we do offer a variety of Sencha training. Obviously, you need to pay for that, but we're trying to get to a model where we can deliver more of that without you having to fly somewhere to get trained. You know, we'd love to have more online trainings, which we are starting to do. We'd love to have more just interactive documentation that takes you through. You know, this is one feature, now build it. You know, this is another feature, now build it. So it's not just reading till your eyes glaze over. You know, so take a look at this and. Very honestly, like, let me know what your thoughts are on it, because it's feedback like that. While that we don't love to hear it, we realize that that's something that that's a problem that needs to be solved.
You could jump in and use JS Fiddle or Sencha Fiddle to just play around with the individual. You could build an MVC app there. It doesn't have to be gigantic.
Right, but a lot of people look at it and just like, I want to break something out. Like, well, I want to take some code that I've used in another project, and then we're just pull this piece out of here, and pull this piece out of there, and finally you put it all together, and it doesn't work. But okay, now what files am I missing? When I go off searching, pay attention to that, because I use architect to start with. Or now I want to do a new project, and I want this whole piece in there, but now I'm using architect. I want to roll this stuff maybe here, because this was never generated. It's even understanding well, if you have heard the whole years of use, still pretty complicated.
Sure.
It's kind of the nature of the slowly trying to make everything work on a platform.
It is. I mean, when you're also taking, you guys are taking points, pretty amazing, and it's really kind of got to. You really almost, I don't know, it's kind of hard to really refer to.
We haven't spent enough
JavaScript framework anymore.
We haven't spent enough time helping people get up to speed as we have blowing features out the back door. That's fair criticism, absolutely. So
just recently, we've been putting a lot of emphasis on exactly what you described, kind of building up this code base of different components, different parts that can be used in various applications, because as you start to do a lot of apps, you do find yourself writing kind of the same things over and over. We've found it's becoming a lot easier with 5 now, though, and actually that's one thing you didn't touch upon when you talked about kind of the bindings, and that it's view controllers. The fact that view controllers now exist and can be instanced against a specific view means that you can really kind of take that functionality and template it across different areas and things like that. So obviously it kind of goes back to the core feature set and standardizing that. So definitely I feel like I know what you're saying, and that's why we're putting more emphasis on kind of building up this code base of frequently used classes and whatnot. But, yeah, one thing I will, I don't know, maybe you'd have a different opinion about Architect. I don't think it's the best tool for somebody just getting into it to jump into, make this really complex application, bring out all the code, and then try to start working with it outside of Architect. Architect is kind of a one-way, once you start actually writing the code and take it out of Architect, you can't really go back in. So yeah, that's definitely, I mean, Architect is certainly good for so many different things, but I don't think it's that great for kind of learning, especially if you're going to do the whole application. But setting up the framework, you need, definitely it's good for that.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see this. I haven't done much with, a few more weeks ago. The project is killing me. Turn my focus back to
Sure.
doing good things. So I've been looking out of force.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
good
to see that focus is there. That's something that.
Because the thing is, most of what we actually have on this page here is repurposed from our existing API documentation. We've just changed the presentation so that it should be more of like a logical, this is how you learn the framework, rather than here's just like 18 hours of reading, not really organized in any given way. So, it's certainly not the the ideal endpoint, but it is trying to at least take small steps towards solving that larger problem.
Is there, as far as touch, is there a piece that does a similar thing as far as like walking you through?
Not yet, no.
Why it's certain things are done particular ways?
We haven't turned our attention back to Sencha Touch yet. It's more been company-wide was really focused on making sure XJS 5 was solid. And again, it's sort of twofold. One, it should be pretty clear that most tech companies want a product launch to be solid. I mean, if that's not your goal, then you should just go home. But we did such a bad job with XJS 4 when that product was launched that we sort of realized that if we didn't, put all hands on deck and make that absolutely rock solid, that we would be doing ourselves a great disservice. Because then our customers wouldn't buy more products and I'd be out of a job. So, we will circle back and do that with Sencha Touch. We will circle back and do that with Architect and all of our other products. We do have a greater vision for this. It being 3 weeks removed from the product launch, we just haven't quite gotten there yet.
I dropped my 4 at 5.
Mm-hmm.
Run? Do I need to run command again? Do I need to do?
You shouldn't need to run. Well, I take that back. You will need to run Sencha command just so that you can update any of your bootstrapped files. But the odds that your application will come up in the browser and start up running are very high. The 2 areas in which you might experience some friction are going to be around the data package and the charting package. So if you've done a lot of charting customizations, because we switched to the Sencha Touch charts, the XJS 4 charts still exist in XJS 5. You just have to include the legacy charting package. So that's a very small change you'd have to do there. Regarding the data package, because we've had to rewire the way in which client-side sessions work and rewire a handful of other things, the data package, any logic or modifications you've written around the data package might require some digging through. But in terms of the application coming up and running in the browser, very few problems getting you to that point. But obviously, you step through the entire app to make sure there aren't random bugs here or there. We tried to minimize API changes, so not that there aren't any, but we've improved our reporting of those to your console, so that if you're using something deprecated or something that's been changed, more likely than not, you'll get an error that isn't mystical. So it isn't going to be completely seamless. I think in software I would be lying to you if I told you it would be, but it will not be difficult.
One thing we did run into, we never figured out why exactly with upgrading one of our apps from 4 to 5, is that we were getting issues with missing dependencies. So if you run into that, check the actual source folder where all the Sencha classes actually are that's copied to your app, and make sure those things are still there. It's not kind of, again, I don't know exactly why it happened, if you've heard of something like this, but it seems like when we upgraded, not all of the 5 classes were copied over. Some of the 4 classes were still there. So we just just replaced the entire source directory, so we had all the class files. So just keep that in mind.
It might depend on what version of either the download or Sencha command you had, or how you did the actual upgrade, if you use Sencha command to upgrade it or not.
It probably has to do with the fact that anytime there's an incremental beta release candidate thing on top of it. So yeah, that might have something to do with it.
Could be.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 4 licenses are transferring to 5 if you bought the license within 12 months.
If you bought it within 12 months, you should be covered for XJS 5.0.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, that's
You may want to check what you got from Sencha. Licensing is something I'm not really qualified to discuss at length, but I believe our policy is if you've bought within 12 months, you're upgraded automatically to the next version.
Yeah, we just did. Obviously, we have several licenses, and being able to at least upgrade one was nice. So.
Future topic might include the reporting, the charting capability.
Yes.
And maybe not just being Sencha-based charting, but I'd also like to see an argument on why that charting was selected for a product versus D3.
Okay.
Or
yeah.
The lift that might be involved with using D3 in Sencha.
Sure. Yeah.
Outside JavaScript library into is not that different.
Okay. Yeah, that would be.
Using the charting package is not that different either. But I also can do.
There are situations when you would want to do some other things in other tools. I mean, we've noticed a lot of customers in XJS 4, anyways, would use high charts. Have you heard of them? So the integration with other charting packages or other visualization libraries like D3 is actually pretty easy. But to your point about a presentation on said subject, I think that would be great too.
Well, high charts made a class-based system. So it was an easier adoption.
Sure.
Where D3 there isn't. Still it's JavaScript. Okay, it would be an interesting topic to see a chart to be made, an argument, be roundtabled on reporting visualization.
Sounds like a topic you actually know something about. Do you want to volunteer first?
I could, but we would justice out of got to be other experts at other meetups or data visualization meetups.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
Steal one of them.
I want to say what the biggest benefit probably with charting is really when you get pretty accustomed to the degree that you're interacting with like sprites on the chart. The fact that you can kind of use this very similar to just like the element methods and things like that. So you would, you can basically attach listeners and things directly to these sprites. Obviously, I know some of those other libraries can do that, but that's something when charts first came out wasn't, really possible without a lot of workaround. So. Again, though, if you're just looking to do simple kind of just graphs and things like that, And,
Put on the box.
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I can just jump to raffling off some prizes, and then we can, talk more casually here at the bar.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll use this, to kind of, sorry, not to interrupt you or anything,
Yeah.
but if anybody wants to grab another drink and still think it's there, I mean, feel free now.
Okay. Well, yeah. But
I'm sorry, I just have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm really new to Sencha.
Mhm.
Does this introduce any kind of security vulnerabilities at all?
not. I mean, okay.
You're
So
talking about it's like bi-directional.
yeah. So one caveat I always talk about with regards to security on the web is that the web is inherently insecure.
Right.
And so, in that sense, XJS doesn't introduce anything new to
does
that.
it make it easier?
But
to explain?
I mean, not really. I mean, here's the thing. There are some best practices you would want to follow to avoid things like cross-site scripting attacks or SQL injection attacks, things like that. The way Sencha's data package specifically might mitigate some of those risks are that when you create model definitions, you can define what kinds of validations or object types are permitted on any given field. So you might be able to say that for records that take string values, that they have a certain validation they need to pass in order for that record to be passed up to the server. So you could make sure it didn't validate against SQL injection, or you didn't allow for anything that looked like HTML, or a variety of other things. So Sencha has all the tools there, but we also don't assume anything out of the box in your defense. Much in the same way that arguably we could turn on HTML validation on model records. If your backend didn't already validate against that, you've got larger problems, right? So really, we don't introduce anything, but I don't think we really do anything extraordinary in addition to that. I know.
I guess my question was more was security kept in mind?
I mean, I would say we work closely with our enterprise customers, so any concerns they've brought up to us, we've tried to mitigate, but not being on the engineering team, I couldn't give you an example off the top of my head.
One last question. Engineering WebSocket support out of the box.
I don't think we have anything out of the box in Next.js 5, but I know we've got at least one community plugin that does that.
Yes.
We did an implementation with WebSockets before, so if that's something you're working on, definitely feel free to.
I've done it. I've used the plugin, the community.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It
Yeah.
works fine.
Yeah, I don't think we've. I mean, one of the things that we've tried to be conscious of in the framework, because there are many awesome community plugins that do things like that, or add functionality in other ways, is the framework's got a lot in there already, and even though we've modularized it as much as possible, we're conscious of trying not to just further bloat the framework with features that not everyone is asking us for, I guess, in that sense. So not that WebSockets aren't valuable, we just haven't heard enough demand to add them, if that makes sense. So like in the case of maybe grid widgets, which is something that I showed earlier, we've had a lot of customers ask for the ability to put form fields and buttons and all kinds of other stuff into the grid, far more than customers asking for WebSockets. So that's my take on it.
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm gonna jump right to raffling off these prizes, but feel free to stay afterwards and keep asking questions as well. Was you asking for a Sencha Touch app to go over at some point? You. So this is a really bad example of a Sencha Touch app. Something I did really quickly about 2 years ago, just for the sake of building an app in Sencha Touch. And all it does, I've got a list, and I'm getting data off of the meetup.com API. So as I mentioned earlier, you need to RSVP for today's raffle. So what we can see is that the 2 meetings we've got scheduled are the 2 you'll find on our meetup page. So Sencha Milwaukee Introduction and Ext JS 5 Overview and TBD. And we'll see that those are, in fact, here with the dates. As I click on one, I get everybody who's RSVP'd yes for the meeting. So that's all this app does, other than I've got a random number generator picking a winner. And by random number generator, we all know that there are no true random numbers in computer science. So pseudo-random, yes. So again, one of the worst Sencha Touch apps I've in action or Ext JS in action. Again, these are actually written by the guys from Modus Create. So
You have more people on your list that are in this room.
yeah, so
Your random number generator.
if you're not present, you cannot win. Also, if your name is Arthur K. or Omar Al-Mishwit, did I pronounce that correctly? Then you guys aren't eligible, then everybody else is eligible. So that's it. And as you're picked, then the name comes off the list. So for example, Jessica Gilmore. You have your choice of prizes for tonight. Congratulations, Jessica.
Thank you.
So then we'll notice Jessica's been taken off the list here. Hey, JP. USB charger, yes sir. Pass that along.
Yeah, you look on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
you look familiar to me.
All right, let's see here. Knox is not here tonight. Nick Purvis? Nick here? Too bad. Wah, wah. Tom Jordan? Not here. Wah, wah. Brad? Brad was here, right? You are here?
Ineligible.
Oh, you got
No,
t-shirts and
you can
books.
be eligible. I was giving you a hard time.
Eligible?
What do you want a t-shirt or a book?
Ext JS.
Here you go, sir.
Thank you.
Jeff Kruger. Hey, what do you want? Pass it on.
Those really are good books, actually. They helped me when I was picking things up a while ago.
Arthur, you can't win. Brett. Woo! One size only. Here you go. There. Omar. Josh. Which t-shirt you want, Modus or Sencha?
Great one.
I don't want to knock over glass. Pass it down Luke.
I'll take the Sencha t-shirt.
Sencha t-shirts.
Thank you.
Let's see here, Jesse.
Hard choice, but.
Here you go, sir.
Thank you.
And then, is Chris actually here?
Yep.
Okay, well, I do have a collection of Sencha pens in the back. That's all I got here. I'm sorry. But thank you for coming. So, sorry? Oh.
Oh, he was gonna be
Oh. So, feel free to come to Corbiza next month on the 22nd. Not exactly sure what we'll be talking about yet.
Yeah, we'll try to get that updated in the next.
Yeah, so stay tuned there.
Won't be a last minute thing, hopefully, but we will have the next meetup up there in August, probably in the next week as well.
Yes.
So I might be kind of reaching out to some of you people about topics, what